Thank you. I think our next presentation is coming from Bouke. If you're ready, Bouke. He's a philosopher from Amsterdam, and he's introduced himself to you already. His research is bridging the gap between research and practice by connecting to medical practice and technology development. In his talk, he's going to share insights from an interview study that he conducted about lived experience of communication of people with locked-in syndrome, their loved ones, and medical professionals. Thank you, Bouke.
Thank you, Shane. And thank you for reading out Benke's presentation. I thought it was a beautiful life story. Yeah, so I'll just get going. Indeed, my name is Bouke. I introduced myself already shortly at the beginning of the webinar. I will present to you today research I did about lived experiences of communication and personhood between people with locked-in syndrome and common communication partners. And I did not do this alone. I worked together with my supervisors, Janna van Gunsven, Wijnand IJsselstein, Nick Ramsey, and Mariska van Steensel. And I also worked together, and that I also want to say at the beginning, I interviewed 8 people with locked-in syndrome, 8 common communication partners, and 10 medical professionals. And they are really at the foreground of this research. So, what is LIS? Well, I don't think I have to explain that here, but let me just press something. Yeah. So LIS is a condition where someone is severely paralyzed and unable to speak or write, but has impaired cognition and consciousness. In the Netherlands, at least, the prevalence is quite rare. It's 7 in a million people that have LIS, and the causes range from neurodegenerative disease, such as motor neuron disease, to strokes or accidents. And the quality of life of people with LIS is generally good, and it is dependent on communication. And the method of communication for people with LIS is diverse, but almost everyone uses a form of AAC technology, that is augmentative and assistive communication technology, to communicate. For example, the letterboard, which is like quite traditional, where you have someone putting a finger over a board and then the person with LIS signaling a moment when to stop the finger, for example, by blinking their eyes, and then you can type words, or more advanced technologies like eye tracking devices that track where someone's eye is looking at, and that way you can also type on a screen. But also head mouses and basically any kind of technology that can make use of residual bodily movement is of crucial importance to the quality of life of people with LIS.
Hello. Oh,
Sorry?
can I speak? Can I mention something?
I'd rather not, actually. Can you do it?
Okay, fine. Yes. Just cue me up.
Great.
Thank you, Stefan. Perhaps if we can either post questions on the group chat or save it until the very end rather than interrupt. That would be great. Thank you, Stefan. Go ahead, Bouke.
Thank you. So that is locked-in syndrome from an objective or scientific perspective, but the question I am interested in is, what is the locked-in syndrome like from a subjective perspective, so the lived experience? And research into subjective experience of LIS are not very common. This is because it's hard to obtain because of the communicative difficulties that people with LIS experience. But at the same time, it is very important to get more insight into this for care, for the design of their assistive technologies, and in general, because of the kratom from like disability rights movements, nothing about us without us. So that is where the motivation of this study comes from. And so the question I ask in this particular presentation is, how does locked-in syndrome shape experiences of communication and personhood? So I will first talk a little bit about LIS and experience of communication. Then I will present my interview study that I did, and I will end by reflecting a little bit on the implications for care and technology design. So in the literature on AAC technologies, it is sometimes claimed that speech neuroprosthesis, for example, brain-computer interfaces, have the potential to restore communication to people living with paralysis. And there we see a particular notion of communication, namely communication as the ability of a person to transfer information across to someone else. For example, being able to signal yes or no, or I am thirsty, or I am good, and so on. But I want to ask, what if exchanging words is not the same as communication, as one of my interviewees said? Maybe communication is more than just the sharing of information. And this is just, I will not spend a lot of time here, but this is just to show you a bit of the background of the inspiration where I'm working from. This is one of my favorite philosophers, Merleau-Ponty, who talks here about the experience of communication. I see a lot of activity in the chat. Let me just. Okay. And he writes about communication that here he says that it's not just someone sharing information, but communication is actually also has to do with the body. So there are all kinds of bodily dimensions to communication. When I'm speaking to you right now, I'm using my voice in a particular way. I'm gesturing my hands in a particular way, and so on. And he also says that you only have an experience of communication when there is also another person that is able to take up my expression of communication. It's a different kind of idea of what communication is than the one that I just showed you here, where communication is the ability of one person to transfer information across to someone else. From this philosophical perspective, you would say that communication is actually a phenomenon where at least two people are interacting with each other through bodily interactions and speaking. And the implication of this is that it is also in communication that we perceive each other as full persons. I get a sense of personhood when I communicate with someone else, and in that experience, I realize that the other person sees me as a person as well, so that we see each other as persons. And so that the experience of personhood is dependent on the ability to communicate, and it's related to it. Okay, that's just a very quick, philosophical background, but it means that the question that I'm asking about how does Liz shape experiences of communication and personhood? I ask it from a background where communication and personhood are seen as related experiences that always involve more than one person. So I interviewed 8 people with locked-in syndrome. The etymology of these people varied from strokes to accidents to the end phase of motor neuron disease, or ALS. And I interviewed them in a written way through emails where we sent encrypted Word documents to each other. And I did it in this way because this can facilitate actually a more in-depth interview setting than having a one-on-one face-to-face conversation where it takes maybe a lot of time to type out long answers. And I've heard from my participants that this way of interviewing actually allowed them to take the time to formulate something and to feel actually appreciated on their sort of tempo of communication. And I also interviewed communication partners of people with LIS, specifically 8 caregivers or loved ones, people that are close to people with LIS, and 10 medical professionals that are involved in the daily care of people with locked-in syndrome. And these I included because I see communication and personhood as these related experiences. And these interviews, we transcribed them and I analyzed them with thematic analysis. And now I want to show you the results of those interviews. I will also add quotes, anonymized quotes with all the things that we found. And maybe just good to know that some of it maybe, it's not the lightest material to say it like this. Okay, so these are the 3 themes that together, I think, describe, or hopefully describe, typical experiences of communication and personhood of people with locked-in syndrome and their common communication partners. So I'll just read it out. The first thing that we found is that everyday access to social contact is highly precarious for people with LIS. Communication technology and residual bodily movement signify a mutual lifeline between people with LIS and their social others. The quality of social contact is shaped by the range of bodily and/or technological expressivity of people with LIS and the adaptive responsiveness of their communication partners. And then thirdly, the extent to which people with LIS are and feel perceived as persons is impacted by, first of all, their access to communication technology and residual bodily movement, so theme number one. And second of all, their bodily/technological expressivity and the adaptive responsiveness of their communication partners. I will now delve a little bit more into these themes. The first thing that we found is that everyday access to social contact is highly precarious for people with LIS, meaning that it's not something to take for granted that you have access to communication and the social world at all if you experience that syndrome. And that for that reason, communication technology and residual bodily movements are a lifeline for people with LIS to the social world, but also the other way around. For common communication partners, communication technology and bodily movements is a lifeline to the person with locked-in syndrome as well. So here we distinguish 4 subthemes. The first subtheme is if there is access at all to the social world or social contact. And here someone with LIS said in an interview, when communication is restricted by physical impairment, we lose our connection to the world around us. Using a BCI reestablishes that connection. Secondly, there was a theme of when there is access to the social world or the person with LIS. And here a loved one said that if that thing went off and kept going off, you do not go for every alarm. And here I think what is interesting is that if an AAC device loses its reliability or bodily movement loses its reliability, then for the communication partner, it becomes very hard to have access to the person with LIS as a communication partner and to really see what is going on. Thirdly, we found a theme about where there is access. So this specifically applies to some communication technologies like brain-computer interfaces. That a participant here says requires a hardwired connection that limits where and how it can be used. So then we see that if, when, and where there is access to communication technology or bodily movement at all to people with LIS, is this mutual lifeline between the people with LIS and their social others. And if this is not constituted in the right way, people with LIS and their communication partners can have an experience of social alienation. And here's a quote from a loved one of someone with LIS that I think is really beautiful, where they said that instead of actually still being part of the situation you are in, you have become a passenger of a world. The second thing that we found is that the quality of social contact, so if it is able to get off the ground at all because of this access, is then shaped by the range of bodily and technological expressivity of people with LIS, and also the adaptive responsiveness of their communication partners. So here the first thing that we found is that the tempo of contact or communication is very slow for people with LIS. And someone said about this that if communication happens very slowly, it is more like a question or a command. Exchanging words is not the same as communication. The second thing that we found is that the tone of contact is also shaped by the technologies that they use. Here someone said about using their AAC device that my tone is a big issue. My husband always thinks I am mad. My kids always think I am yelling. And my mother thinks I am blaming her for for everything. But besides this more slow experience of communication, or maybe a more computerized tone, I also found very interesting new forms of contact that arise between people with lists in their communication program. For example, someone with lists sharing that I blink to communicate numbers and times. To have my nose cleaned with a Q-tip, I stare cross-eyed at my nose. To put on lip cream, I pucker my lips. To show I'm hot, I hang my tongue out like a panting dog. To brush my teeth, I tap my tongue on my front teeth. My husband and I form an O with our mouth to signal, I love you. Where I think you also really nicely see that communication always requires two people that are on the same wavelength. And finally, also new norms of contact emerge between people with lists and common communication partners, by which I mean that here a medical professional says that you must remember that there is a person in front of you who communicates more slowly, who needs time, who communicates, wants to express themselves. You want that person to be present. They are not stupid. You have to treat that respectively. Be patient. Look at them. Address that person. Where you see that there's a new norm of contact, which maybe requires more slow communication, but then it's still possible to have a typical experience of communication. These two things, so the access to communication technology and residual bodily movement, and secondly, how this bodily movement and the technologies shape their experience of communication, together constitute the extent to which people with locked-in syndrome are and feel perceived as persons. So here I have 3 quotes that illustrate this. First, from a person with lists, that says that I now have a much greater appreciation of what is all involved in speaking. Without the ability to communicate, you might as well be a statue in the corner. And the last one, describing about her experience of her mother that actually became completely locked in. And she describes here the difference in experience between having some kind of bodily expression and nothing, where she says, it was a huge change for me. It has become harder to see her as a person. When all communication disappeared, I have to say that until then, even it was the smallest thing, I saw my mother as a person. And similarly, a medical professional that in this quotes reflects, first of all, on how difficult it can be to see a person with lists fully as a person, because their body has become less expressive. But then in the end, they also reflect on when she's used to communicating with someone and she knows the ways of bodily communication and knows how their communication technology works. She says that I have no trouble communicating. So it really shows that the access to communication technology and the quality of this technology and the bodily movements can be of constitutive importance for the experience of personhood of someone with this. So this is the question that I started with, and I will get to a kind of conclusion. Conclusions, I think, from my interviews are, first of all, that people with lists experience a precarious contact with the world, and that communication partners of people with lists experience precarious contact with them. Thirdly, that the quality of this contact that is established is dependent on the design of communication technologies, bodily expressions, and how people with lists and their social others relate to them as communication partners. And very importantly, I think from my study, it shows that lists can make it more difficult to be perceived as a person, but that this experience of personhood is drastically dependent on communication technology, residual bodily movement, and the skill of communication partners. So what does it mean for care and the design of AAC technologies? I think that the first theme, so the access to communication, really shows that AAC design should focus on, first of all, on if, where, and when can they be used. So it should be reliable devices. It can be taken outside. It can be taken in day and night.
Bizarre.
Sorry, somebody's got their microphone on. Would you mind
Yeah.
everybody please making sure your microphones are off? Because being interrupted halfway through a presentation is extremely difficult. I'm sorry, Bouke.
No worries. Thanks, Jen. And secondly, I think what this first theme shows is that it is crucially important in the care for people with LIS that there are medical professionals that can establish a reliable mutual form of bodily communication, like an eye blink or a letterboard or something that they can reliably signal yes or no. If that's okay, so that's like the first part, I think you get into the second, more richer part of the implications, which is that I think it's actually very important for AAC devices to focus on voices with richer intonations that can be varied in tempo, but also that allow for more emotional and bodily expressions. I think my research also shows that maybe the importance of something like nodding or saying or all these kinds of things that signal when is it your turn to talk, when is it my turn to talk, but also the ability to express emotions, maybe with emoticons or other kind of bodily expressions, can really facilitate a better experience of communication between people with LIS and their communication partners. But also think of the communication partner. So maybe have a screen that also has a backside where it can signal to the other person, hey, I'm typing now, or hey, I want to take a turn in speaking. So really include the other person in communication as well. Secondly, I think it really shows that it's so important for people with locked-in syndrome to have access to familiar medical professionals, people that are used to working with them, who understand their bodily expressions, who understand their tempo of communication, and so on, because it can really help with their experience of being seen and treated as a person. And related to that, that it's very important for communication partners, so loved ones and medical professionals, to adapt to all kinds of rich forms of communication, bodily communication, that already exist, but that may be hard to see from a kind of third person perspective. I think I'll stop there. And if there are any questions, I'm very happy to answer. Thanks a lot for your attention. And it was great to share my research on this stage. Yeah.
Thank you, Bouke. That was really very, very interesting. And it backed up a lot of the things that had been talked about in the previous presentation by Venka about how frustrating it is not to be spoken to as a person anymore and how important it is to look at all aspects of communication. It's very carefully done research. Thank you very much, Bouke. I think, Stefan, you have a question?
Yeah, I really appreciated your discussion, and I wanted to mention also the person that inspired me to get into this area was Dr. Femke Nijuber. Oh, I'm an American. I'm so sorry. And there's a lot of reasons I'm sorry, and being an American. But she's done any number of papers and research on quality of life for locked-in people. So I'd highly recommend her work, which is, I just Googled it, and it's easy to find. There's a lot of papers. And anyway, she's an inspiration to me, and also someone that's looked deeply into quality of life and locked-in syndrome.
She is.
Yeah,
She's
thanks.
a wonderful person. Thank you very much for bringing that to everyone's attention, Stefan. I worked with Femke several years ago, and in fact, she co-hosted with me before Bouke came on board. So that was probably 4 years ago. And she's just a marvelous person. She's too busy with her own research now to attend today, but I know that she's going to watch the recording. Because she's fascinated by all aspects of this field. So she's with us in spirit, and she'll certainly be keeping up with our work and the research that's going on, that's publicized here on our forums. Okay. Anybody else got any more questions for Bouke?